Welcome to Face to Face. Our guest today is Satish Jha, a serial entrepreneur and life member of TIE. During his young days, he also was editor of one of the most influential Hindi magazine called Dinman. I grew up on that magazine, and in fact, in many ways, I give credit to that magazine because I had read one article about Latin America, and that brought me to Latin America. Satish is also the founding editor of Jansatta. And we are going to go to memory lane, talk about his days when he was very top player in Indian media at the time in 80s, and how was the media then in India and how it has changed today. So Satish, welcome to our show.
Namaskar, Benji.
Namaskar, and thank you very much for your time. I'm glad finally we are talking today after all these years.
It's a privilege, considering we both went to the same university.
Yes, JNU.
Secondly, we chose the same profession in two
Yes.
different parts of the world. I'm delighted to meet you.
Yes. Excellent, sure. So Satish, I think let's go back a little bit memory lane. And I think you were in still your 20s when you were editor of the Times of India Group magazine in Hindi, Dinman, which I think one of the most read and very influential newspaper at the time, especially in the Hindi belt. So I want to talk, let's just start with that how did you become editor of that magazine and how the magazine was then at that time?
You know, when I was about 15, 16 years old, I suddenly saw a magazine called Dinman, and its reputation among professors and people who thought at that point in time about India and the world was so high, so almost like God's own words. And I was only 16, 17, this language I did not understand. And now about 10 years later, one evening I was at the house of Satish Jha. We were having dinner, and suddenly in the middle of conversation, he said, I want you to start something like The Economist for the Times of India Group. I said, look, that will be a very different culture, take a couple of years of starting up and creating a different environment from what you have today in Bernard Coleman. He said, in the meantime, why don't you start with the Dinman editorship? I was shocked because it was a very daunting task in my mind. Dinman had a certain stature in my mind, but I said, that's fine. I didn't, blink.
Satish, if you can also, those of some of our viewers who may not know who is the Satish Jha is, so if you can tell us about him a little bit.
And Satish Jha is the owner of the Times of India Group. He's like Sulzberger of India in some ways.
Sure.
And he was very young. We are basically same age. And we had good friendship. His father was very kind to me, and his family was very kind to me as well. And I knew them because the Times of India's daughter was married to Indian Express son.
Mm-hmm.
The son passed away, and because I was at Indian Express before, so I got to know both families. Mr. Goenka was very kind to me, and that kindness got extended to Times of India family as well. Sure. So that's how I became editor of Dinman at 26 years of age. Dinman was a great magazine founded by, in my opinion, one of the tallest literary person of India was Agayji. He founded it when he was about 55, 56. The Rugby Sahai ran it for about 10 years. Nandanji was just before me for 5 years. And now I was the friend of Nandanji's daughter last month. And suddenly I've been asked to become the editor, and he handed over the charge to me. That is 1st July 1986. The day is really fresh in my mind. It was a huge day. Everybody in Dinman was older than I was. My interns were older than I was. So I was the youngest member, and I was the number one. And all I remember is it was a great privilege to have been part of that. In the next 9 months, I took the circulation to 3 times. I remember these 2 facts.
So now let me ask you that, at such a young age, when you go in your first day at Dinman, and what is the first question which came to your mind?
Obviously you have trepidation. You're going to meet people everybody is a known person across the nation. You're probably the least known person at that point in time. You're the youngest, and you have to deal with them. But my advantage was I had started a newspaper before that called Jansatta. My team was quite large, and I had initiated the concept from the name to masthead to how to basically create the mock-up newspaper. I'd gone through the whole process of imagining, thinking, charting out, creating a paper, and taking it to success 100,000 in 6 months. So I'd become used to dealing with large teams of people who were all much older than me. So that problem was not there, except the legacy was very important. On 30th June evening, I went to meet a Geji who was by now 75 years old. And I said, and without your blessings, I won't take up this job. He said, you will do well. You have my blessings. Next morning at 9:30, I was at the job. It was an amazing journey, I would say. The way we changed it, my first job was to ask my colleagues, were they comfortable with it? And they were all my father's age. And they said, we have seen 3 editors. We have been here since the beginning of the magazine. So we know how to respond to the challenge.
So when did the Dinman really started? Do you remember?
Yes. Dinman began in 1964, 65, actually end of 64. Yes.
Okay.
And I became the editor in 1986.
Okay.
So 22 years later.
Okay. And then were you the last editor of Dinman, or there was somebody else after you?
I appointed a deputy editor sometime towards the end of 88. And then I came to Washington, D.C. So, I remained the editor, but I had a deputy editor looking after. But sometime around, while I was still on a fellowship in Washington, D.C., basically it was on foreign policy making. And I heard that Samir Jain, the chairman of the company, had decided to close down 11 magazines at the same time. So sometime in, you're looking at 89, it was all shut down. I was still officially the editor until I would say later October in 89. So I remained, they paid me, I remained, positions were all intact, but all the magazines were shut down by the group, 11 of them.
So why those magazines? I think, at that time, the media was also in the control of very few people and there was not so much competition. So what happened? Why all those magazines were closed for publications?
What happened is Samir Jain met a man called Don Graham, who used to own, who's the son of the owner of Washington Post. He learned the concept of product journalism or magazines or papers as a product. So he brought in a product perspective and he began looking at the profitability of each magazine. Then he found the only 2 magazines that actually were very profitable were Femina and Filmfare. And Femina and Filmfare basically were very, very profitable. Everything else was not profitable enough for them to think in terms of what you call surviving the magazine. So they looked at it. I had made Dinman 3 times the circulation size, kind of profitable. But what happened is that in the overall scheme of things, it wasn't measuring up to Filmfare and Femina profitability. So only 2 were retained out of 13, 11 were shut down, and one letter shut them all down. So that was the power.
So the Filmfare and Femina are still there.
Still there, yes.
Still they are doing very good, actually. So
very well.
They're
very profitable magazines.
Excellent. Now, briefly, before we come to the modern times, tell us about Jansatta.
I joined Indian Express just as a coincidence. There was something called Agenda for India, which was held in April 1980, after Mrs. Gandhi came back to power. Ramesh Thapar was the founder and owner of Seminar, very powerful intellectual magazine.
Yes, I do remember that. Yes, yeah, sure.
Ramesh Thapar's sister is Romila Thapar, the great historian of India. Ramesh Thapar was he was like a lion among people, men of his times. So he organized Agenda for India. Everybody was a leader in that space. Because I had worked with Jayaprakash Narayanji at one point in time when I was still in my teens. So some people knew me, they pulled me in. So I was the only one who was kind of just out of the teenage there. Everybody was a leader, 55 and above, up to 80, 85 years old. And I don't know, suddenly I felt like saying something because Professor Raj Krishna, member planning commission, said something about economy. So I just raised my hand and Mr. Thapar said that, please introduce yourself. I said something very interesting. I said, well, my name is this, and I also earn my living. I didn't know what I did. And at lunchtime, somebody walks up to me and he says, well, Mr. Jha, what do you do for a living? So I began talking, said, do you like journalism? I said, it's a great profession. Do you like to join? I believe it's very difficult to join. How about being my deputy? Who are you? I own Indian Express. So that's how it began. And I was suddenly within 2 months' time in Indian Express somewhere. And I didn't know what to do because even the Bob Woodward of the world, they only used to get a desk of 3 feet by 2 feet. And suddenly I find I'm being given a room which was like 15 by 12 feet. So I said, something is changing here. I had no idea about journalism. I just got thrown into the situations. And then I began learning. Arun Jaitley was my very, very good friend. He was student union leader. He was a lawyer, young lawyer. No, we were friends. He walked up to me on 7th or 8th July. I said, I'm getting bored. Get me out of here. He said, you know something? If you danced on your head for next 30 years, you won't get where you are. So shut up and be here. I said, well, I will not give him a chance to say it again. I wrote my first editorial article on 14th of July. That was on power sector. And I get a call from the chairman of the biggest company in power sector who was not very happy with it. 28th was on railways. Now I realized what I was doing was changing things, shaking people up. And slowly I got addicted to journalism. That's what happened. And then, 1st January 1983, in the meantime, the grandson-in-law of Ramnath Goenka, he became my good friend, and he brought me into the board situations, etc., because we became friends. So then I began calling Ramnath Goenka ji Dadaji. So he became like grandfather, and he was about in his 70s. I was about 22, 23, so it just made sense. 1st January 1983, when I was walking into Express, I saw him. So he said, Happy New Year. And I said, well, I'm happy it's New Year, but what's really great about it? So he called me and we began talking. What do you want to do? What are you saying? Suddenly I said, look, anything I do or say, does it really make a difference? He said, why do you say that? People read me because they think I'm working for you. They want to see what your machinations are, what games you're playing. Nobody reads me because I know anything. They read me because they think I know what games you're playing. So I could have that conversation with him. He said, what do you want to say? I said, look, if you want to change India, if you want to change it for the poor, then we have to write in the language of the people, which is poor's language, which is national language, which is local language. And I know a bit of Hindi. I like to try in Hindi. He said, Hindi aati hai? I said, yes, I know Hindi. Do you write in Hindi? I said, no. How do you write? I said, I'll write spoken Hindi. Then he gave me a lecture on spoken Hindi, why that's what's important. And then he said, how old are you? I said, well, I'm going 23, going on 24. He calls his secretary, called so-and-so, Vashu, she was called. This boy wants to do something, let him do it, and you help him and you become his boss, whatever. That's how I founded Jansatta. Decision was made in 25 minutes, exactly.
Now, Jansatta is still there, right? It is being published? Yeah, it's okay. And again, by the Times of India group, right?
Jansatta is Indian Express group.
Is the Indian Express group. Okay, I'm glad you clarified.
Yes, the man was.
Okay. So now that was then in 80s, and media scene was very, very different. We just had a Doordarshan and All India Radio. Now, fast forward to almost 30 years or so, and then the whole media scene has completely changed in India. Whether it's a television or whether it's a print or whether it's online or anything you go. So have you been following the media and what is your take? What is happening there?
Yes, once you become addicted news person, it's hard to leave it. So of course, I like to watch it. I'm not saying I'm totally in it, but I surely watch it. And many of my friends, they own it. Incidentally, I like to share with you, in 1990 January, I signed up a joint venture agreement with CNN, Ted Turner, for 50% ownership of CNN in India. Then, because I did not have much experience and money, so I tied up with Indian Express to support me, but they did not understand television. And so we let it go after some time, and then someone else picked it up and whatever happened, but it kept my interest alive. Today, when I look at media as such, the respect, the institutional strength that media had in 1980s is kind of disappeared. For instance, during the emergency period, Mrs. Gandhi tried instituting all kinds of mechanisms to control media, but media brought her down finally anyway. In 18 months, 19 months, there were people found ways of slipping in the news despite censorship. And
now, I want to start you there for 1 second. Do you think something similar happening here in the US?
Well, US media has been in some ways, when I look at the New York Times and Washington Post, I'm amazed at their boldness as such, right? On the one hand. But what's happening here is society is so divided that if people who follow one leader don't listen to other at all, the society will remain divided. And here's a two-party system. So it's very difficult. People are working on the margin here. But in Indian context, it's a much more complex system. There are more than 22 national parties, right? So there, the role of media becomes very, very important. Today, media in India is about 95% totally controlled by the state. This is being done through the party, through the mechanisms, totally Machiavellian mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I've seen the downfall of media in the past 6 years is I couldn't have imagined that could happen. If it didn't happen during emergency, imagine when there is no emergency, it can happen. That was beyond thinking. But today, like people say, it's a Godi media, it's a lap media, or basically they have become survivors rather than holding the mirror to the state as such. Because the first role of media that I learned in Indian Express was, and Express was unique in that, we hold the mirror to you, no matter who you are. So I was, when Congress government came, I opposed that, and people thought I was with the opposition. When opposition came, I opposed them. They thought I was with Congress. But that is the role you have. You are the biggest opposition any state should have because you are holding the mirror to them. I'm not an opponent of yours, but I stand where your opponents stand without being your opponent. And that role is being denied to media today.
So now actually coming back again to the US, since we live here, now, sometimes at least I see a headline and I don't know where the headline is coming from. I can really tell whether it is CNN or where it is Fox, because such a clear-cut division I have not seen in my journalistic life either. This is, and so it is it's a really, I don't know, it's a very confusing situation for the audience and readers to figure it out which one is truth and which one is not. And so if you look from that context, and also I want to ask you about from the monetization point of view as well. So for example, the journalists and the media have always struggled, but there have been some good times and bad times. And so how this social media concept today and its popularity is impacting the business of media. I know with your experience with Jansatta at that time and also running Dinman, how the finance is playing a role today?
Okay, so when it comes to social media, it is, in India particularly, every social media piece is free. WhatsApp is free. Everything, so individual does not spend money on those things, number one. Number two, all newspapers are offering their versions, electronic versions, which are also free. So nobody's actually paying money for any of the mainstream media as such. Effectively, it's become free because if you don't give free, you lose out. So it's all basically free in some ways. Having said that, print media still remains. Televisions are making money. The money comes from advertisement, and there are ways and means of doing that. The new ones have some challenges, but I would say that society has stepped up. For instance, the print, the wire, my friend Parinjay Guha Thakur, many of them, people have come forward to donate to these people to create something which is authentic news, because otherwise it's all lap media, so to say. They call Godi media in Hindi. They're sitting in the lap of the government, basically. So
today also, as long as you have a smartphone with you, you are a reporter. You can take any picture, you can videotape, you can put it on your social media, Twitter. So in a way, that has also empowered a lot of people. That
it has happened, but citizen reporter concept, what's happening is this. When an ideological force of Hindutva is representing 80% of population, and even within my own family, for me to stand up to BJP can cost me relationships. It's that powerful. So what happens is, even if I see, I don't want to post it unless I have the courage to do that. In other words, a citizen does not have the courage to even speak the truth. Partly they don't see it. They like to see through the lenses of the new leader. That is what is very frightening. That people have begun not seeing what is in front of them and interpreting that what it should be. So they are not looking at what's happening. Some people who stand out, they're barely up 2, 3, 4, 5%, and they're a real minority and they're under threat. Anyone who speaks against the government, the troll army just trounces them, and the kind of abuses they get heard. It's very difficult to be an independent person, no matter who you are. Even if you are a well-known commentator, you really get trolled so badly, you wonder what's happening. So in other words, what's happening here is this: a political leader who is so charismatic has been able to turn the whole concept of media as a fourth state into a question altogether. There is no fourth state. Supreme Court is compromised, judiciary is compromised, state executive institutions have been compromised. So this is a very unusual stage in India's own evolution. And I hope, I'm praying India can get out of it, because no one sees a way out of here. You know, you saw the
So,
parliament right now. What happened is there was no opposition. They passed the bill without opposition. Can you believe that?
sure. So now, Satish, we talked about the transformation of media from 80s to today. Now let's just talk a little bit about JNU as well, because you joined JNU in 1975, right? If I'm
Yes,
correct.
yes, exactly.
And you left in 77, right?
78. Yeah.
Yes, and actually I also joined JNU in 1980 and left in 84. So at that time, JNU was a very different institution, very different type of culture, philosophy. And when you hear today what is happening in JNU, how do you compare JNU of 70s and JNU of today?
Well, it's like saying the gap between paradise and hell.
Mm-hmm.
JNU we went to was an oasis of learning.
Mm-hmm.
When I came to Fletcher School and Kennedy School, I felt knowledge and learning that I went through in JNU that taught me enough to stand on my own anywhere on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
It gave me a way to think about issues, gave me a lens to look at life as such, gave me an opportunity not to be less than anything, and even understand things I never understood before, know how to know what you don't know. That's what JNU did. Every other university in India was basically rote learning. You go and give examinations. JNU wasn't so. Economics faculty, if you remember CSP, every single member was brought in by Vice Chancellor Parthasarathy, who was one of the great Vice Chancellors of India at that time. Every single faculty came from Oxford and Cambridge, implanted into JNU, and they all wanted to be in India, and they never left India after that. They created a place where our classes, they went to teach in Oxford and Cambridge. Abhijit Banerjee from JNU got Nobel Prize last year. So that's the kind of faculty we created at JNU. JNU is the only university in independent India that produced Nobel laureate.
So, but now the today JNU looks different. So what do you think, what is happening there and what should be done?
I would say one thing, that one challenge between the old Nationalist Party, Congress Party, and the BJP is this. BJP looks at past all the time. So they don't believe in facts. They believe in a belief system. They don't look at the facts. So the whole drive for the last 6 years has been how to make JNU like any other university. Mm-hmm. How to destroy the JNU's stature as a place where people can think differently. And that is a very concerted effort. They brought in a vice chancellor from a technology place who does not really have a great sense of what social sciences are all about and does not have a sense of respecting academia. The freedom is gone. He instituted several policies which question the very dignity of being an academic profession. So I think either as a professor or student, the whole environment of learning has been brought down to a fight between secularism and Hindutva. So when you're fighting that, there's no learning happening there anymore. So the people who came from between early 70s to, I would say, even late 90s, and I would say even 2005, 6 or so, everyone who came out and did well, they said, JNU changed our life, our future, our thinking. We stand here because of JNU. In fact, people went to do PhDs elsewhere. They came back, we are here, unique, because JNU gave us this opportunity. So JNU was a culture. It was a crucible. It was a melting pot of how to think about our environment today and the future. It was, those were the days when you could go on, as happens in college, to 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and you could go on having that Ganga Dhaba chai and conversations that happened. They shaped us all in some ways. And look at the batch that I had. Of the 27 students in economics we had, how many joined the civil services, but how many joined Oxford, Cambridge, and other institutions, known professors, and how they became leaders of opposition in the country. Every single person achieved something which was extraordinary by any imagination. Just the 27, if you look at total 500, we were there. When you came, probably we were 1,000 people in social sciences and SIS included. Look at the kind of influence we have. The foreign minister is from there, the finance minister is from there. They all are juniors, right? So that's what JNU was, but it is no longer the same place. And I'm very sorry for that. We need 100 JNUs in India, but we are losing the one we have. And that's a sad day.
So now, Satish, as we come towards the end of our interesting conversation, I'm just going to give you a quick quiz. I will just say, maybe rapid fire, I should say. I will just tell you one word and just you see whatever comes to your mind at that time. We can have some fun?
Go ahead, let's do that.
Okay, so let's start with media, okay? Print media in India.
You want my word?
Yeah, no, I want you to say that when I say print media, what comes to your head?
Dead.
Dead?
Dead.
What about television?
Joke.
Radio?
Has no influence.
Social media?
Thriving.
Now let's talk about a little bit politics. Sonia Gandhi.
Has been.
Rahul Gandhi.
No future.
Priyanka Gandhi.
Possibilities.
Narendra Modi.
Unfortunate.
Nirmala Sitharaman.
Very unfortunate.
And Foreign Minister Jaishankar.
Very bright.
Now, I'm going to ask you a similar question about US as well here. So let's start with Joe Biden.
Not inspiring, just needed.
Kamala Harris.
Has to become presidential.
And Mr. Trump.
Is a sad day for America.
Mr. Barr, Attorney General.
Very, very unfortunate.
Satish, thank you very much for your time. I think I really had fun and I really appreciate your time. I'm glad we connected.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I really